Welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show where we treat the final edit of the movie like the script. I'm one of your hosts, Bob Rose, and with me are two gentlemen. Right now, Jimmy's going to introduce himself.
I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and script consultant, and yeah, that's it.
And now, Jamie?
I'm Jamie Nash. I am a screenwriter and the author of the Save the Cat Writes for TV book and the Save the Cat Beat Sheet workbook. So check those out.
All available right now. And today we're going to talk about, a movie I feel like all of our listeners should be way too familiar with. We're all way too familiar with it. We're going to talk about 1987's Evil Dead 2. Before we get into our discussion topics, we're going to go around and say whatever we want, our personal experience with this movie. Let's start with Jamie.
Great. So Evil Dead 2. My history with this is kind of like later. I didn't see this in the theater. Now that I think about it, I've never seen this in the theater. Like I've never even seen
Wow.
a revival or anything of
There's
this
been a
movie.
few in town.
Yeah, I've never seen it. I don't think I have. So the first Raimi movie I saw in the theater was Darkman. That was the first one. And then I remember when I was in college, I made everybody around me go see Army of Darkness on opening day. Like I was full on 100% Raimi by the time I was like freshman in college or whatever it was. So Evil Dead, I think I saw Evil Dead 2 first, though I may have seen Evil Dead first. I can't remember exactly. It's Evil Dead 2 and Evil Dead I kind of lumped together. It's a little like, people say Empire is better than Star Wars and Star Wars. I feel that way a little bit with Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 for this reason. I find Evil Dead to be a huge inspiration for me, creatively and things like that. What they did in that budget, how creative it is, how much energy that movie has. In some ways, I do like it better, even though I acknowledge that Evil Dead 2 is better in many different ways. And I love horror comedy, and they really emphasize the comedy in Evil Dead 2. But I kind of lump them together. And the reason I say this is they're probably the only movies I didn't see in the theater first. Maybe Jaws would be in this, that are in my top 10 movies, of all time, usually when I make a list. If I think of a list, Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 are usually in my top 10. So, and this
They
is
take
like,
up one spot or two spots?
I kind of just lump them together. I feel the
Okay.
same way about Star Wars and Empire. Even though I acknowledge Empire's the better movie and there's a lot of things, Star Wars was something special when I saw it. And Evil Dead, the first Evil Dead, and I know a lot of people don't necessarily feel, they kind of discount Evil Dead, the first one in some ways, and just skip to Evil Dead 2. But I've rewatched Evil Dead, the first Evil Dead, so many times for inspiration. I've read all the books about it. Well, when I say all the books, I've read the Evil Dead Companion, and I've read all of Bruce Campbell's stuff. I feel like there's one other book I've read about it, but they're all I can think of. So I know all about the history. Sam Raimi is like he if I had a poster on my wall as a teenager, it probably would be him. It wouldn't be Farrah Fawcett or somebody. It would probably be Sam Raimi with the camera. He's the guy I always wanted to be or wanted to meet or whatever. So it's very inspirational movie to me. But again, I kind of came at it after the fact. I wasn't in on it from like day one. It took me a little while to see it. I probably didn't see it till about 3 or 4 years after it came out. And then it was on video. And I watched it from there and became a huge fan. But again, the first Raimi movie I think I saw in the theater was Darkman. Oh, the only other weird thing, I remember seeing the trailer for Crime Wave when I was a kid. I can't remember what movie I saw, but I saw this trailer for Crime Wave. And at the time, I think it was called the ABC Murders. They changed the name or something. I can't remember exactly what happened. I'd have to look this up. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe this isn't true. I didn't research this before we started. But it was something like the ABC Murders. And I remember seeing it and thinking, like, that is the most amazing movie. I can't wait to see that. And then I never heard of it again until after I saw Evil Dead 2 and all stuff. It kind of was a movie that vanished. And then eventually I saw that. It was okay. But I remember that trailer having a huge impact on me. I can't remember what movie I saw or I saw the trailer, but it looked funny. It looked like had a lot of energy. It looked really kind of odd in some ways, but cool. Um, and I remember I wanted to see that movie, and then years later I found out that was Sam Raimi. The movie he was going to make between he did make between Evil Dead 1 and Evil Dead 2. But nobody really ever watched it or paid attention
Well,
to it.
he went. Evil Dead 2 happened also because Crime Wave was a failure.
That's right. That's right.
He went back to the well.
He went back to the well, which he's done a couple times in his life. Dark Man, and then he went back to Army of Darkness. Then he did some things that were very popular. And then he kind of went to Drag Me to Hell just to kind of ground himself almost to see if he could still do it. So anyway, that's my long and rambling Sam Raimi Evil Dead love. I love like Quick and the Dead or one of my favorites.
Best.
I like so many of his movies. I'm not a big fan of like the baseball movie he made. Whatever. I never really got that. I knew some sports people love that movie.
It's a good movie
for the love of the game.
Yeah.
I couldn't get into it. Simple Plan I love, but it doesn't feel like a movie like only he could make. You know what I mean? It feels like something and I think that's the point. The Gift, I feel the same way. It's a cool movie, but I feel like M. Night could have made that. Where these other movies, Quick and the Dead, Evil Dead, they're movies he could only make, and he did make, and that they just ooze him, and that's what I love about those movies so much.
I think he just wanted also just to prove he can
do
stuff that wasn't.
He doesn't always have to be doing like crazy flying eyeball
Simple
shots.
Plan is a great. I think it's one of the best of the '90s. Honestly, it's really a great movie.
It's really good.
It's It's if I watched it and didn't know the credits, I wouldn't be like, oh, it's Sam Raimi.
Yeah. Okay. I
Jimmy.
pass the conch.
Jimmy.
Pass the Book of the Dead.
Yeah.
So this came out in 87, right?
Yep.
Okay, in 87, I was 7 years old. I did not see this when it came out. My parents were not horror fans, so I had very little exposure to horror. And in fact, I think the only horror movie I ever saw before this was The Lost Boys, and we're going to cover that on another episode in the future. So I moved to Baltimore I remember this vividly. I moved to Baltimore in 1991, and in my neighborhood were some kids who were horror fans and did have parents who were horror fans. And it was the early 90s, man. So we were like completely unsupervised. And I'd go over and hang out, and they had a wall of VHS and all this stuff that I've never seen. On the same day, I had never seen Evil Dead 1 or Creepshow. On the same day, I watched, as an 11-year-old who had only seen one horror movie, Evil Dead 2 and Creepshow 2 back to back on VHS, man.
Same effects team.
Same. Oh, shit. I didn't even know that. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Blew my 11-year-old mind. I never looked back. I make horror movies now. So I can definitely say this was a huge deal for me. That being said, it's not. I don't really think about like top 10 lists and stuff. I have seen this movie plenty of times, but I don't think about it as one of the greats, even though it is amazing. And upon rewatch, there's a ton of stuff that's not on this list. Couple things about the script. I was really struck by how much of the very standard arch plot cheeseburger techniques that are in there. There's a not so secret weapon, which I was really surprised to see. There's dialogue repetition and reversal. There's scenario repetition and reversal. There's like a 7-point finale. There's like 3 high tower surprises. But it was almost a 5-point finale, but they kept doing high tower surprises. So I was like, we don't need to do it on the show. But I was surprised at how many of the things there's a touchstone and a twitch with the necklace. There's like all the things we talk about on the show are in use here. And I don't think that I definitely didn't expect for all of those things, all of those techniques to pop up. So, and for anyone listening, if you've never actually read this script, so this was one of the first scripts I dug up when I first started screenwriting on Drew's Scriptorama, Jamie. The OG online database for screenplays. I definitely downloaded this off of
Me too.
Off of Drew's Scriptorama. I think Scott Spiegel is the other writer. You're going to talk about who wrote this shit in a minute. But if you're out there and you've never read it, Sam Raimi is a great fucking screenwriter. Like, his scripts read like the movie, and they're great examples for, they use evocative language, they're fast, they're exciting, they read like what you end up seeing in the movie. So I think they're great examples, not just this one, but his other scripts too, and the co-writers that he works with. They're great examples for, like, you know, voice. So yeah, check this out.
Cool. Like, check it out. Like, read it.
Yeah, check out the
Yeah.
script. The
Yeah.
script itself.
Or
It's a
just
fun
Sam
read.
Raimi scripts in general.
Yeah, I highly
Mhm.
recommend this one.
You don't, or is that everything?
Yeah, that's it.
So I think I've said it on the podcast before. Like, I'm not necessarily a horror guy. I think of this podcast, I'm the least horror guy. I mean, you guys literally made horror movies, which I've helped on, but I'm
Yeah.
not a horror guy myself. So, and my parents weren't, so I never had any exposure to this stuff. In high school, my best buddy Brad, who listens to this podcast, let me borrow a taped like a tape from another tape, like that was from Blockbuster or something, that like his family had made or something. He let me borrow this thing and he said, "This is my favorite movie," and that was Evil Dead 2. Now, I'm going to be completely honest. I took it home and I watched it and I fell asleep halfway through, and I wasn't that interested in it because I think my taste in horror and film had not developed that much. So like, I didn't realize what I was watching when I watched Evil Dead 2. I feel like I'm embarrassed to say this to you now. Like, mid-90s, I watched it and I was like, eh. But then, being who I am, and this very much is who I am, I ended up watching Army of Darkness. And I fell absolutely in love with Army of Darkness because Army of Darkness is not a horror movie.
Right.
It's a comedy movie. Let's be honest. It's a comedy action movie. And those would be my two favorite genres. And I ended up falling in love with Army of Darkness. So I was like, maybe I was too harsh on Evil Dead 2. And you know, that was like 30 years ago. So over time, I have grown to love all three movies, you know, and Sam Raimi obviously is one of my biggest influences. But you know, I was brought into Evil Dead 2 through Army of Darkness, which is probably sacrilege for a lot of horror fans. And I do love the first Evil Dead. I appreciate it. Obviously, my least favorite one, just because it's a great horror movie, but I'm not as big on horror. So yeah, I'm an Army of Darkness guy that fell in love with Evil Dead 2 later, and I am embarrassed to say that because I recognize how perfect and wonderful Evil Dead 2 truly is, and I do love it. I mean, I own it and I worship Sam Raimi and everything. It's just the beginning was kind of embarrassing. But I still love Army of Darkness the most because I'm a comedy guy. I have an Army of Darkness poster literally above, only on the wall,
that's awesome.
on the other side of this monitor, which
Mine's
see.
right over here. You can't see it. There's Pulp Fiction, but it's over there somewhere.
It's over there. Okay, so me
Yeah.
and Jamie both have Army of Darkness
I
posters.
have an Evil Dead one signed by the cast and Bruce too.
That's awesome.
Wow.
I mean, it's not hanging right now. I don't think. I think it's in the garage.
Wow, guys, I
not
didn't know you
signed.
guys were that big of fans. That's cool.
What, of Evil Dead movies?
Yeah.
My biggest, because I go to these horror conventions and stuff every now and then when I get a chance. Bob goes and gets Crocodile Dundee posters, but that's
Right.
We talked about that in the
As
last
established in other episodes.
episode. Yeah. The one bummer is I've never been to one because Raimi does go to these. I see him in pictures with people and stuff. He's never been in one around here, so he's one I've never gotten a signature from or met or shook his hand or took a selfie with, and I'm kind of bummed about that. I did have a meeting with Ghost House at one point, and I was basically the whole meeting was me trying to grovel to get a meeting with Sam Raimi, and the guy was super cool to me. Like he was like,
you didn't care if they bought your movie, you just wanted to meet Sam Raimi.
It was so much me just saying how much I love Sam Raimi and how I'd love to meet him, like passive aggressively trying to meet him. And the guy was like, "Oh, sure, no, Sam loves to meet people. We'll hook that up." And then he ghosted me. He was like, "This guy's scary. We got to keep him away from
The
Sam."
Ghost House ghosted you?
No, the guy was super nice, but he acted like Sam was super accessible. I do have I don't know if this is the point to say it. I have a Sam Raimi super accessible story to tell as well. It's
I've
a quick
heard he's
one.
a really nice dude.
I say do it, dude.
Yeah. So Ghost House actually distributed Seventh Moon. Not that has anything to do with it. That wasn't the thing that got me my meeting, and it wasn't what this next story is about. But Eduardo Sanchez, director of Seventh Moon, as well as the Blair Witch Project, as well as being the only guest on this podcast at one
Hey,
point.
The only allowed guest also.
allowed listeners.
That's right. That's right. He did a TV show for Sam Raimi a couple years ago, a few years back. It might have been, what was the
It was the app that was the
yeah,
app
what was the
channel.
app? The short
I
app?
It's
don't
already
remember.
Quibi.
Quibi. I was like,
Quibi.
it's not Tubi. I was like, what
The
is it?
thing that
Quibi.
failed
Quibi.
instantly, right?
So he did a project for him with that. And then I think he even he might have done another project. Like they had something else going. And what he said about him, which this is the story I always tell about Sam Raimi, because I always say it's cool, is he said Sam would get on the calls for development notes, like for this project they were doing.
That's awesome.
And the way Sam liked to develop the script is he liked to read it with everybody and give notes. And he would say Sam would get in there and do voices. He'd be like an old lady or something, like, hello. And I was like, that's the most Sam Raimi thing I have ever heard in my life. And he said that's the way Sam likes to do it. He likes to go read through the whole script end to end, and everybody's supposed to act out the goofy parts and stuff like that.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And that was, to me, I was like, that is the coolest thing ever.
I love it.
Yep.
That's so great.
Yeah.
I was also going to say the last thing was Three Stooges is really important to me. Three Stooges is the background of my computer, and Sam Raimi's influence being like, the Three Stooges is one of the reasons I also absolutely fell in love with that guy. Just truly. And what we should do, one time, it wouldn't be a bad idea to do like 2 Three Stooges shorts.
I'd be totally into
the scripts to Three Stooges. Has anyone ever done that?
I don't know.
No.
Has anyone ever done a script podcast on Three Stooges?
I doubt it. That should be our whole podcast. We should just do episode after episode.
Of Three Stooges.
Yeah.
I was
of
be an entire season of the show.
Whole year of
Three Stooges.
Right.
I grew up in an era where the Three Stooges were ubiquitous, and everybody saw every episode of the Three Stooges, as they did Our Gang and all kinds of other things. And I wonder nowadays if kids even have ever seen Three Stooges.
Right.
I'm not sure.
I remember like Nyuk Nyuk University on Sundays with Leslie Nielsen and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like we grew up when they were like playing on TV, like a normal TV show.
Yeah.
All the time.
I mean, all the time. Every day I would watch a Three Stooges episode practically.
That's why you can't blame me for falling in love with Army of Darkness.
Yeah.
You can't, because it's like, that's like a Three Stooges movie almost half the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get into our talking points. Jamie, who wrote this shit?
Yeah, this was written by Sam Raimi. I don't have the IMDb up, so I'm doing this from memory.
I can help a little on this,
but I think it's Scott Spiegel and Sam Raimi were the only 2 writers on this. Is that correct?
Yeah,
okay.
I actually watched the making of last night, and Scott Spiegel, he actually wrote a draft of the movie for Evil Dead 2 that was never seen the light of day, and it is absolutely, completely, and totally different. He said, like it has nothing to do with what we've seen at all.
My memory of this was that Sam wrote an Army of Darkness, basically, script, and they couldn't. De Laurentiis wouldn't fund that or didn't want that, so then they had to go and write Evil Dead 2. So Army of Darkness is what Sam wanted to do. This is my memory of it.
Sure.
And then Stephen King somehow brought Dino De Laurentiis. I think he was working on Maximum Overdrive, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And he brought De Laurentiis into it and said, you should fund this movie. He said, okay, I'll give them, a little bit less money than they want, which was like 3.5 million or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave them that. But he said, I want it to be like the first movie. I don't want this medieval shit or whatever. So they then had to go and kind of rewrite the script to be like the first movie.
Right.
And that's when they brought Scott Spiegel in, and he was the one that brought a lot of the comedy. He had written a bunch of those shorts. I don't know if you've ever seen any of those Sam Raimi shorts. They're probably on YouTube at this point.
The Attack of the Helping Hand.
That's the one.
It's like the hamburger helper hand killing people.
That's right. Right.
And Sam Raimi saw that and was like, we're going to make this we're going to cross this with The Exorcist or something.
Okay.
And that's what Evil Dead 2 became.
Okay,
right?
cool. And and then Scott Spiegel, just after that, He went on to do a couple. I mean, he did a couple. I think Sam Raimi. I think he might have done Quick and the Dead and some other movies. He might have helped out on Army of Dark. Did he do Army of Darkness? I don't know. I can't remember. I didn't bring his IMDb up, but I know he went on to direct like sequels to things, like From Dusk Till Dawn 2 or something, or Hostel 3, or things like that. Like
Okay.
he did that. That's where his future path. I'm sure he wrote a few things too. Again, for whatever reason, Evil Dead 2, I'm like, I knew this backstory so well, I don't have to bring up any Wikipedia page. So there's holes in my. I should have brought it up just
He
double
did direct From Dusk Till Dawn too.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So there you
Look
go.
at Jamie with the encyclopedic knowledge.
Yes,
Doesn't even need the online oracle.
He also directed Hostel 3.
Hostel 3. Yes.
Yeah.
That's the one I thought.
And that was like 2011.
Right.
So
seems like I know the person that did Hostel 4. I'm trying to think of who
there's
it was.
a Hostel 4?
I think maybe Ed was up for it. Ed Sanchez was up for like
okay.
maybe he was up for Hostel 3. I remember he was up for it. Somebody I know, somebody in my circles was up for like Hostel 3 or 4.
Okay.
Anyway, then on top of that, just to kind of talk super quick about Evil Dead 1, the first Evil Dead, that was a movie. These Detroit friends wanted to make a movie. They made a proof of concept called what's it called? Within the Woods, I think that's what it's called. But the proof of concept for Evil Dead. Bruce Campbell was part of that group. Sam, and they went around and raised money from friends, family, and a lot of dentists. So them and the Coen brothers were big on, we raised money from dentists. And of course, Sam was friends with the Coen brothers. They lived in an apartment together. And Evil Dead 2, like, it's crazy the people that lived in that apartment. Kathy Bates lived in that apartment. Holly Hunter lived in that apartment. Bobby Joe, the character from Evil Dead 2, was based on Holly Hunter, I believe.
You're right.
But there were all kinds of people, but the Coen brothers were good friends of them. And the Coen brothers, of course, kind of famously, they wrote Crime Wave with them, but they also edited, the Coen brothers edited some of the sequences in the first Evil Dead, like some of the fast montages of like kind of those Edgar Wright rip off things he rips off. Like I remember they were the ones that did those, I think, if I'm not mistaken. They were the Coen brothers quick edits that came into play. So the Coen brothers were good friends with Sam and the gang. And then the Hudsucker Proxy, he did Second Unit and stuff like that.
I mean, you could argue that Blood Simple is Sam Raimi's Coen brothers movie, right?
It's very similar in style and stuff like that. There's a lot of stylistic similarities.
What was the box office? Did we say that?
Yeah, it made, according to this, I looked up Wikipedia, and Box Office Mojo, it has it at about $6 million. I think that's domestic. That puts it at 115th in 1987, right around Who's That Girl, which made $7 million at 110. These are the ones. Hey, Witchboard, one of my favorites, at $7 million.
Wow. Okay.
And so Witchboard beat out Evil Dead 2. That's all you need. Here's an underrated movie that I loved as a kid, Wanted Dead or Alive, with Gene Simmons and Rutger Hauer. I love that movie. Gene
Simmons' death in that movie is hilarious.
One of my favorite moments of any movie is the last 10 minutes of that with Gene Simmons' death. I love it. like to me, that's the height of cinema. Everybody kind of bags on this movie. I love the death scene in that so much.
The height of cinema.
You know, it is. When I used to write for Kevin Smith's old website, I would put up clips on YouTube of movies I had to write about. It's still up. It's the Wanted Dead or Alive death. You can probably find the clip that I uploaded like 15 years ago from a VHS tape.
Hardly anybody's seen that movie. I love to walk them through the ending of that movie. I just say, okay, well, there's a scene and he's chasing him the whole time. I won't give it away.
Yeah, don't.
But it's so good.
When we do Wanted Dead or Alive,
that's right.
Okay, let's get to Myth and the Trap.
Yeah, so Myth, a monster in the house, something we talk a lot about with horror movies. A monster in the house movie is a save the cat term for the save the cat genres. This is the thing you'll hear me repeat week after week after week when we do horror movies.
No, Jamie, I'm gonna cut you off. We've only done 2 horror movies this year because of
Yeah, it's
that.
been
We
low
try
on
to
horror
be
this
soft.
year.
We
Okay,
try to be
okay.
easy on you.
Okay, good. Well, I'm sure I repeat the Save the Cat genres a lot, nonetheless.
But we love when you do it.
Okay.
Oh, dude,
there
it's
you go.
the best.
It's
So-
the best.
Awesome, because I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it hard. I'm going hard. So Save the Cat genres are something from the book Save the Cat, obviously, and they're kind of these patterns of storytelling. So usually when you hear genres, you think of horror and comedy and romance and things like that. They're kind of, I almost think they're audience expectations. Like you expect to see, what do you expect to see in a romance? What do you expect to see in a horror movie? What do you expect to see in a comedy? The Save the Cat genres are more about plot. They're more about story. They're really storytelling patterns. And some of the ones he has are like Golden Fleece. They're about people that are trying to capture a prize, or sometimes sports movies like win a title, sometimes a quest movie like capture the gold, or a heist movie would be like that. That's a Golden Fleece. Buddy love, they're relationship movies. They can be friendship, they can be romance. And in this particular one, most horror movies fall into what's called a monster in the house, which is where myth comes from. Monster in the house, the acronym. So the monster in the house movies have 3 particular elements. They have a monster, a house, and a sin that brings about the monster. There's usually some kind of moral transgression that brings about the monster. This one is pretty obvious. It's pretty standard stuff. The monster are, the Deadites, the Evil Dead, whatever. I don't know if there's is there a particular god behind the Deadites?
They're called the Kandarian.
Kandarian.
Demons, but
yeah.
in the lore of
'cause
the
dagger.
franchise, they're just Deadites now.
Okay.
They've been rebranded.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Army of Darkness pretty much the
So
Army of Darkness is the Rocky 3 of
Yeah.
yeah.
He's even going like this, like hands
right,
in the
yeah,
air.
right.
So the Deadites are the monster. The house is the cabin or the woods in general. Because it kind of, in some ways, it's the woods, which
It's
I'm
the
about
woods.
to get to. Yeah. And then the sin is reading the book. It's kind of the hubris, or actually playing the recording, or whether it's the person before Bruce who read the book aloud, or whatever you want to call it.
It's like one big disrespecting the monster.
It's disrespecting the monster, and that's a common theme in a lot of old school horror movies, is kind of just the disrespect of the monster, kind of treading in places where you're not supposed to, and ignoring the warnings, are kind of the old fashioned views of these kind of things. The one thing I wanted to mention and I've mentioned this before, one day I will have a screenwriting book from Save the Cat come out about horror that I've already written. And I've been either adding to or stealing from for this podcast. So, if you listen to this podcast, you want to buy the book, because it's all, I've already said it all.
Buy it anyway.
Buy it anyway. Just give me whenever it comes out, 5 years from now or something. So the one thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to actually open the book up so I can reference a couple things super quick, is I believe part of the house discussion, when you are coming up with your house, is coming up with why the hero is trapped inside. And this is something that isn't technically in the original Save the Cat. It's something that I've kind of added to it. And there's a whole bunch of ways to trap people, and I've come up with some. I'm just going to read you some super quick.
I love it.
So these are my types of, these are some brainstorming exercises. So if you're coming up with a horror movie, and you're trying to do a monster in the house, I think one of the first things you should ask yourself is, why are the heroes trapped? Why can they not get away? And some of them are very obvious, like help is miles away. And I think that's part of this one, is help is miles away. This one also has the bridge, which is another one, which I call imprisoned or cut off, So that's another one that this one has. So this one goes one of the simplest ways: help is miles away, or imprisoned or cut off, like the doors are locked, the bridge is out, something like that. it is kind of weird that the bridge is out, but there is another way, and he doesn't even really. He's like, I don't care about that.
It's like a ravine, but there's also a trail,
The whole
which is
notion.
odd. I always thought that was odd, but whatever. It's magic.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fine.
It's like it's almost like somebody gave them that. They were like, that would screw everything up. Just screw it. They can walk there.
Well, they established it that it swallows the path, so
That's right.
the woods
Yeah,
can
they
change
do.
themselves. So it's fine.
Yeah. There is a weird thing when I was watching it this time. There was two things that occurred to me. One is all the scenes I love and remember happen like in the first 20 minutes of the movie. And I'm like, whoa, it's like all my favorite scenes are in the first 20. I didn't really remember that, to be honest. I was like, I thought they were spread out more. But two, does he just kind of crash in this guy's cabin? And I guess I never really cared about that. He just goes to some cabin he thinks deserted and hangs
Pretty
out.
much.
It's cool.
Yeah.
No,
It's
it's not on the list, but it's very interesting subversion of the before world. There is no before world.
There's no exposition in this movie. There's no backstory. It's just like they wanted to set out to make it lean and mean.
And they also they remake the first movie in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like a demo reel in some ways. This movie, in all the best ways possible that a demo reel could be. It's like, so anyway, Help is miles away. The place no one dares to go. That might be another one. That might. Yeah, or just in general for a house, like
you mean like, just the cabin itself?
Yeah, like Chernobyl Diaries or something like that, or Dracula's Castle, or it's kind of that's a trap in some ways. An island of terror, and that could be anything from space, like Event Horizon or something, trapped in a spaceship, to open water where somebody's just lost in the ocean, or to an actual island of some sort. New and alien worlds. And I'm thinking with that, like a movie like Silent Hill is almost like an alien world. In a weird sort of way, I think Happy Death Day, the time loop of that, is an alien world. Yeah. Bad Weather. So a movie like one of my favorites, underrated, Storm of the Century, the miniseries, Stephen King miniseries.
It's on Hulu, HD.
Yeah,
it's great.
I'm a big fan. Or something like The Fog. It just kind of cuts off from The Fog, or
The Mist.
The Mist, exactly.
We've done The Mist, right?
Yeah. We did. Quarantined could be another. Happens a lot in zombie movies and stuff. Invaders at the door. Sometimes the trap is that the invaders are literally at your door, so you can't get out.
Attack on Precinct 13.
Or The Purge, or even if you look at like Cujo at the end, when trapped in the
Rio
Volkswagen.
Bravo.
Rio Bravo would be a good version of that. I'm the Prison is another one. So these are possession movies in some ways. Anywhere where you're kind of the prison and the thing's trapped inside you. Curses, like Drag Me to Hell, we talked about. The Ring. Thinner, maybe a movie that Sam Raimi, that Dino De Laurentiis asked Sam Raimi to direct, and he said no. He wanted to do Evil Dead 2 instead, by the way.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he offered him Thinner back in the day.
I love Thinner.
Yeah, well, this is probably an early iteration of it. It's probably not the one we got. But can you imagine?
What I love about Thinner is that all the magic and all the everything that's in the movie, and they can't take it, and they're more afraid of one mafia guy than anything else. That's why I love Thinner.
I was a big fan of the book when it came out. I remember I really enjoyed the book. Can you imagine a Sam Raimi Thinner though? What that's
nuts.
Yeah, especially
Bruce
during that time. Yeah,
and it's the guy. It would have been him as the starring role, right? Like Bruce Campbell as.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I would assume, right?
Yeah. I guess. I don't know. I mean, they never went down that path because I don't think Sam was interested for whatever.
Instead,
reason.
it was RoboCop 3.
Yeah, that's right. So Madness is another one that's a little bit like I Am the Prison. Stranger in a Strange Land. So something like Hostel or The Ruins, or something like that.
Old, maybe.
Yeah. Suburban Strangers. So that's something more like the Stepford Wives. Something.
Arlington Road.
Arlington Road's a good one. Yeah. Social Gaslighting. So like Rosemary's Baby. I'm thinking, or Get Out, where everybody is around you like, you're just crazy.
End of Days.
End of Days. Yeah.
Just throwing them out there.
No, they're good. I could if you have good ones, I'll sneak them in the book. So keep throwing them out there. uh, it's funny. I'm trying to get the more modern ones. So I'm always like The Substance, and the kind of the ones that just came out. Like
Yeah,
as the book hasn't come out, I keep going back and like adding like newer things to it, like Long Legs and The Substance and things like that. Everyone for Themselves is another one where it's kind of post-apocalyptic, and everybody's just like The Road or something like that. It's just like everybody does your own does their own
Cabin
thing.
Fever,
Cabin Fever would
a little bit.
definitely be that. I think so. I think a lot of horror movies end up being everyone for
themselves. Yeah.
in a trap. Evil is Everywhere. It's very similar, but like Dawn of the Dead, there's nowhere to escape. Night of the Living Dead, maybe even The Mist in this one, or I Am Legend.
Any pandemic movie.
Yep. And last but not least, All Ends of the Earth. So, and this is very similar as well, but this is more like the monster will chase you to all ends of the earth. So Final Destination might be an example of that.
It
It
follows.
Follows would be.
Sorry, Jimmy. I didn't.
It's okay.
Yep. So
That's how good the code is. We instantly were like,
Paranormal Activity, right? Because it's
Mhm.
attached to you, so it'll follow you anywhere, right?
yeah,
The demon thing.
it kind of blends in a little bit because curse movies could either
That's a
or.
curse too, right?
Yeah.
Yep, the curse follows you. Yeah.
But so they're my ones to think about, and I'm sure there's more, but there's some to give you thoughts. If you're writing a horror movie, one of the first things I think you should come up with is the trap. Why can't they escape? Why are they trapped?
Jamie, would you say that when you're consulting on a horror script that they're often missing the trap, or the trap is not that easy to identify?
Sometimes the trap is not strong enough.
There you go.
Sometimes
I agree. I see the
Yeah.
same thing. Yeah.
it's kind of like a stakes issue, right? Where if the hero could reasonably say, "I'm going home. Why should I do this?"
Yeah.
Then
Right. Yeah.
why deal with the Evil Dead? You know what I mean? Like if they could just get in their car and leave, why would they deal with the Evil Dead? And if that can anyway, you want to take that off the board in the conception
Yeah.
phase. You just don't want that
Yep.
to happen.
Hence why cell phones are a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. You want to talk about Sam Raimi's rules of horror? I think we've
done
covered
these.
this because we've talked about what two or three Sam Raimi movies.
Yeah, this
before.
is number 3, I believe.
Yeah, it's Spider-Man 2, and we did Multiverse of Madness.
Multiverse of Madness.
Yeah. So the Sam Raimi rules of horror. I don't know where I cut and pasted them.
You put them in the doc.
They're literally in the doc.
That's why. I was like, they're not in my notes. But I think I remember them. Tell me if I'm wrong. I'm not looking at the doc. But the innocent must be punished. Is that the first? Okay.
No, the innocent must suffer.
Must suffer. I'm sorry. The innocent must suffer. But that's it, because the next one is the guilty must be punished.
Right.
Yes.
And you must taste blood to be a man. They're the 3, I think. Right?
Yep. You're right.
Okay. So I don't know. Does this one have? They definitely have the first one. The innocent must suffer. The innocent suffers massively in this movie. And I don't really want to discuss these as much as I want to set these up for when we talk later, because I think they all play into what happens later. I'm not sure that the guilty must be punished. I guess. Is there anybody really guilty in this? Like, is there a bad guy in this besides the Deadites? Do you think? Because they all get punished, so I guess that there's people that are guilty.
You could argue her father, but he's not getting punished on screen, right?
Right.
Or no, he is on screen for a second as a ghost, and he is being punished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The trail guide guy definitely is
Jake.
That's who I was thinking. Jake probably is.
Although
he's not thing.
He's not horrible evil off the bat. He's just responding
he's
to
pushed to the limits. Yeah.
He's pushed to the limit, and he's he's in it for himself. But I don't know if that's guilty.
Not to say that these rules get violated. I'm just not sure that there's a guilty character to really get punished in the way we're thinking they usually do. However,
I would say the dad got really punished. He's in he's like basically in like hell purgatory, and his wife turned into a deadite.
It makes the kind of karmic logic all work. Like the guilty, the guilty person is getting punished. Um, the
The guilty family got punished.
I don't think we
Mhm.
talk character arc. Like we said, there's hardly any backstory. There's no exposition in this movie. There's no real character arc. So this movie does have a classic, and I see this more and more in horror. Like horror is the one place where sometimes people throw out character arcs, or they do very, very minimal work with the backstory and the character arc. They just kind of show somebody that needs to grow up in some ways, and then they go through a horrible experience, and in the end you're like, well, surely they've changed, they've been through this horrible experience, now they'll look at life differently. And that's kind of like the minimal character arc that sometimes happens in horror movies, and tends to only happen in horror movies. Other movies don't get away with it as much. Now,
That's
what's that? What's that,
I was gonna
Jimmy?
say that's a good way to put it. Yeah, they don't
Yeah,
get away with it. Other
yeah.
movies do it, but if they do it, then people aren't happy
I,
about it.
I would say this is really where terms like elevated horror come from, because in elevated horror, I think, yeah, I don't like the term either, but I think really what it's speaking to, in my opinion, is making theme inherently a, a part of the horror movie.
Right.
And I really do think that's all it means. I think it's thematic horror or something. That's when you ask me what elevated horror is, I'm just like, you do a lot of theme work in it. You're not just doing what Evil Dead 2 does. I don't think Evil Dead 2 has a lot of theme work. Like, I don't think it has a
Well, what's
deep
the theme
message.
of I was thinking that last night. What's the theme of Evil Dead 2? Don't fuck with evil shit.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
mean. Like,
respect the evil shit and stay away from it.
Yeah, don't go there. That's it.
Whereas
Don't go there.
I think elevated horror tends to have an arc and a theme that deals with some modern social issue or
Yeah,
something like that. That's the difference. That's the only
sure.
difference I see between elevated, if you want to call it that, and any other horror. So, but I think horror is a place where you could. I haven't seen the Terrifier movies. They're one I should watch for my book. They probably, I don't know. Maybe they do have a theme. I don't know. Maybe they do have some elevated theme. My gut, from what I've heard about them, is they probably don't. They probably are more like this. They're probably just like, you need to taste blood to be a man. That's it.
Can we
Yeah.
explain that for listeners? I think that's the one that
Yeah.
needs the most
And it's
explanation.
old fashioned, by the way. We got to point that out. Man.
Yeah. Well, it just means that your main character has to go through a horrible ordeal to grow up. And, and whether grow up
The
means
gender is irrelevant to the statement.
the gender is irrelevant. And I'm using grow up as a very generic, it could be to get over grief. It could be to be a nice person. It could be to go from a miser to gregarious or something, I don't know. It could be any of those things. So to change, somebody needs to go through a horrible, horrible ordeal. And that's what I think that particular rule is about.
I think you could link the reason that this is so beloved to what you were saying before, Jamie, about him kind of not having a character arc and Ash being at this time in the franchise kind of a blank slate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get crucified for this, but it's like he's kind of the dream scenario of what we all wish we would be in a zombie situation or something. We wish we would all become Ash. Like every less than 20-year-old man or boy wishes they become Ash Williams in this movie in that situation, right? Like you're living through him. That's why he doesn't have a character arc. And like he's kind of the Bella Swan of, of Evil Dead. Isn't that her name? Or from Twilight? How she's a blank slate and a bunch of people like put themselves in her character. That was the criticism.
I have a different read on it, actually.
Okay,
though.
yeah, please.
I think he's kind of a doofus. And
oh no, totally.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess
but he's cool in this situation.
I'm not sure if he's cool or not. I'm not sure. I mean, he's cool.
I disagree. I think Ash is cool and only
cool,
one.
That's for sure.
Ash is terrible at everything except this.
Self-preservation.
Yeah. Like I don't know that I want to be like him, but I like him. It's hard for me to say.
I mean, it's not on here, but I did think it was cool that there were some rooting resume moments. Like every time there's like 10 minutes of insanity, the movie slows down and we get reminders of the grief of Linda. They bring the Twitch back and the necklace, and he's grieving in front of us, and then the shit happens again. They really have these strategic moments where they're like, let's remind the people that he is a human being and he is suffering from losing the love of his life, and that is a part of his journey. So
it reminds you why this guy keeps getting back up even though he keeps losing.
Yeah.
And I think that's why he's cool, Jamie. I get him being a doofus too. He absolutely is, but there is something inherently cool even in this movie. He keeps getting back up. He takes his licks and he keeps going.
He's
definitely like Rocky.
What I'm trying to differentiate, like, to me, cool is like, it's arbitrary.
Right.
It's like an Arnold character, right? That's who I'd want to be in Predator. I want to be Arnold. I want to be like.
Well, I would say,
or James
John
Bond.
McClane is cool, right? And John
McClane
gets the crap beat out of him.
Yes,
so
yes.
Whereas I do think Ash is kind of a goofy, like I think John McClane is ready to rumble in some ways. Like, he's got something.
Yeah, that's true.
Where I think this is just me projecting to an extent, because I think you're right. I think Ash is kind of just a doofus that isn't equipped to do this, but but he's a fighter.
Later.
He's a fighter on the inside. So it's funny because he's a doofus that's kind of forced to show he's a fighter on the inside.
If you go Army of Darkness to the TV show,
right,
they embrace his doofiness and they pretty much establish this guy only has one talent in the world, and that is physically fighting deadites, and everything else he sucks.
Right. Even the way he says groovy, like, to me it's making fun of him, as opposed if Arnold did it, it would be kind of cool or something. He'd be like, groovy, or whatever. And you'd be like, groovy. But when he does it, you're kind of laughing at him a little bit. I don't know. I'm not sure. But you still love him. I mean, I love him for those reasons. I'm just saying it's a very nuanced argument
for sure.
I'm trying to make here.
Maybe it's all performance based too. We're really speaking on.
I think Ash is cool. If you only watch the first two Evil Dead movies, I think, well, not even the first one, just this one, I feel like there's more of a cool vibe from this, and then it later becomes, he's an idiot.
No,
he's a loser idiot that just happens to go through all this stuff.
Here's where I'll come around, and we don't have this in the talking points, and I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Is he's unlike almost anything else we see in horror movies in the 80s, or maybe even later, because he is kind of like a take it to him action hero, as opposed to like a final girl something. You know what I mean? There is something where he's literally like, oh yeah, you want to fight with me? Come on, pal. Whereas
he says, like, the Henrietta, let's go. Like, like even if he's been sucking this whole time, he's like, I'm ready. It's got that Al Bundy. He's a loser, but let's rock.
Al Bundy in a horror movie. Yeah,
I mean, there's so much crossover with Al Bundy and
that's kind of
Ash,
what it is.
I feel like.
And to that point, you're right. I think you're right that he is different in that way. Where most of our final girls they're mostly girls in the 80s, or final persons. They don't have that. It wouldn't really work. It just wouldn't make sense if Jamie Lee Curtis was immediately like, let's go, come on, like she is now.
Right.
Like she is now. Like she is.
They took 40 years to get there.
Yeah.
Where Ash was just like, all right.
Right. Or
like day 2, he's in it.
Or like Reagan's mother's like, come on, bring it. Groovy. Wouldn't exactly work. So
there's a piece of Ash starting in this movie where it's like his character is a guy who always maybe wanted this and started to relish the chaos in the smallest of ways, and that's his character. It was always buried in there somewhere.
In some ways, he might be like the black t-shirt wearing fans that attend horror conventions or something.
Right.
You know what I mean? There might be some piece of him. Like, if I ever got in a horror movie, I know what I'd do, or something.
I mean, I would die instantly, but I probably would quote Ash from Evil Dead in that situation. I'd be killed like instantly, but I would say groovy or some lame crap, probably.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, let's talk of the 2 types of horror structures. Whose is this?
This is mine too. And this one, it's funny. This is in my book, and basically, this is more an offshoot of just how many slow burn horror structures there are. Most horror movies these days, I won't say all, because zombie movies, things like that, which this kind of is, or I don't know, it depends how you slice zombies, no pun intended, but most of the modern day horror movies tend to be slow burn, which we've talked about in many of our podcasts, whether it's The Exorcist or Hereditary or something like that, where it's kind of like the horror is present, but it doesn't turn into a life or death battle for survival until at least the midpoint and sometimes the finale. Like it doesn't, we know it's coming. We know that is where it's heading. We know there's no other way out, but it doesn't exactly go there until the end of the movie. Whereas this relentless horror, it actually happens at the catalyst or break into two aspects. So it happens in the first third of the movie. It happens in the first 25 minutes or sooner that it becomes a battle for survival. And this movie almost is, in my opinion, the epitome of that. And this is another Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell famous quote that they always talk about. There was a distributor that they met with, I think on the first Evil Dead, and while they were making it. And it was like some old cigar smoking guy. I think they've named him in time, but he was like, "Hey kids, I'm going to give you guys one piece of advice. If it's a horror movie, you got to keep the blood running down the screen." And they literally did that in the first movie. They had blood run down the screen. They took it literally. But basically the idea was once you start, you got to keep the blood running down the screen. Like once you kick off, this is where we're at. This is blood on the screen. You can't stop. You just have to keep the kind of pedal to the metal and keep going. So their movie is kind of the epitome of this relentless horror, that kind of horror that starts very early on and just keeps the pedal all the way down the whole time. And they do take a little break in the middle when the new people show up. There is kind of like a little bit of a reset. They do some things that you normally do in Act 1. They do kind of in Act 2. By the way, something I've learned is whenever you do this kind of relentless thing that starts, you usually pay the price in pacing somewhere in the middle of the movie. There's some of those, there's a reason why, and I don't think it hurts this movie at all. And a lot of movies do fine with it, but it's just something to be aware of. That if you're like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start on page 1 and have the Deadites attack, and I'm not going to stop the whole movie. Usually you pay a price on page 50. That it's just, and the reason this isn't really about Evil Dead 2, but it comes up here. The reason people put all that stuff in the first 10 is because we're used to it. And as movie watchers, we tend to give you a break. We're like, we'll give you 10 minutes. Just make sure the Deadites show up in 10 minutes. And we'll give you 10 minutes. But sometimes if you're not careful and you try to do this same trick where you start like on page, in this movie, it's page 5. I think the first thing happens on page 5 and it doesn't stop. Sometimes you do pay a price somewhere around page 30, page 40, page 50. It's like all of a sudden things slow down and you're like, whoa, because this movie's so simple, it doesn't really happen. It slows down like for about 30 seconds or something, or 2 minutes, and then it's back on. It's game on. So
do you feel like the remake is the other type you mentioned?
Yeah, the remake definitely.
The remake of Evil Dead?
No, I'm not sure if is the remake. I'd have to rewatch it to really remember. Does the remake slow burn it, or does it?
No, it doesn't.
It's not a slow burn, but it's not what this is.
I think
it's like a trickling of like characters starting to realize what's going on, and somebody dies, and then eventually.
The remake is complicated enough with its addiction. It's elevated, quote unquote. It's got the thing this doesn't have, that backstory.
Yeah, she's got a reason for
and it relates to like an important human theme or something like that. So it needs to take the time to do that, and it does it in a conventional way. It does it in the first 10 pages. It does it in the first 10 minutes. So, but if it was a slow burn, it would be different. It'd be like they wouldn't even know the Evil Dead were there until page 60. And then they realized.
I didn't mean to call it a slow burn. I wasn't saying that. I was just saying as opposed to Evil Dead 2.
No, I got what you were saying. You were more relating it to my second point that we were just talking about, the slow
Yeah.
fast, not the slow burn. That I just wanted to clarify. Um, so yeah, no, I think it's a good example of how, like, probably a studio, a studio screenwriters write a script, as opposed to rebels with cameras in their 20s. I don't know. I guess Sam Raimi was in his 20s when he made Evil Dead 2. I can't remember. Just
They were.
attacking a story and attacking a movie. They do things a little differently, but there is a price to be paid. More for the writers out there trying to do the same thing. I just want to give them the awareness that there's a price to be paid, and it's fine to pay that price. Just be aware of it and tackle it accordingly.
They were all in their 20s, and I know this because in the behind the scenes, Ted Raimi said the only reason he said yes to all that stupid torture was because he was in his 20s,
Right.
or else he could never handle it now, like hanging from
Sure.
the ceiling in a grueling sweatsuit and stuff,
Right.
with the Henrietta costume. It's awful. Okay. Horror comedy. You wanted to talk about this, Jamie, just in general.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of points to bring up
Mhm.
about this movie, but horror comedy is a really tricky thing that I think all of us have, to an extent. I don't, Bob, I'm not sure if some of your stuff would be called horror comedy, but from
Some people have said it's horrific.
yeah, it's horrific,
I don't
and
think that's what they meant, though.
yeah, okay, but uh, but I think all of us kind of know about horror comedy and what it's a genre we like, and I just thought it would be worthwhile just having a discussion of it based on this movie, like some tips and tricks, because it is a difficult thing to maintain the tone and things like that. And I have a few points to make, and Jimmy, if you want to jump in, like
Yeah.
the same time,
So first I'll go ahead and start with Stephen King's
yeah,
if you want.
sure, Mhm.
So this is something, it's been a while since we've talked about it, but um Stephen King, I believe this originally was an article that then got added to Danse Macabre. His Stephen King, for anyone who's out there, has a book about the horror genre in general that includes a lot of horror writing tips. And so this is in that book. So Stephen King has his horror hierarchy, and then Jamie has sort of redefined that for the purposes of the show and for the purposes of idea generation in a way that I feel like is easier to understand. And so I'm going to read his explanations, and then Jamie, if you want to chime in on your redefinition of that. So the first one is what he calls the terror. And he says, when you come home and notice everything you own has been taken away, it's been replaced by an exact substitute. It's when the lights go out and you feel something behind you. You hear it. You feel its breath against your ear. But when you turn around, there's nothing there. So that's what he calls the terror.
Yeah, and I've reestablished that, because the problem is, I think, what's the other word? What's the next word he uses?
The horror.
The horror, terror, and horror. To me, I have a hard time.
Yes.
Like, to me, they're the same thing. I get that maybe in Webster's dictionary they're different or something. So I reestablished the terror as dread, and I reestablished dread as warning signs to the character or the audience that something bad is going to happen, or something creepy is amiss, or some spooky doings are in the area. So they're basically warning signs. And so terror to me is dread.
Yep, I love that redefinition. The second one is the horror, the unnatural, spiders the size of bears, the dead waking up and walking around. It's when the lights suddenly go out and claws grab you by the arm.
Yep. And for me, I just reestablished this as scares, because that's the term a lot of modern studios and producers use these days. So I just call it scares.
And you've been hired, as you've said in the past, to write scare passes, right, Jamie?
To do a scare pass. And that's what they're looking for. They're not looking for me to add dread. They're looking for me to add either, jump scares or big visual moments, or some kind of something that's beyond just dread and psychological.
Okay. And then the third one is, which you haven't changed, the gross out, the sight of a severed head tumbling down a flight of stairs. It's when something green and slimy splatters against your arm.
Yep. And like you said, I haven't changed that. And I do feel there's part of me that feels that scares and gross outs are kind of like the same thing, but different flavors. Like
I do think
scares,
they're kind of. I do think they can be 1-2 punches.
they
They're
can be 1-2
visceral,
punches.
right? It's a
Yeah.
visceral reaction to
Yeah.
something.
Yeah,
I
because
definitely think you get the and the
Yeah.
like you get
And The
those are two
Exorcist,
different reactions.
when Reagan vomits in The Exorcist, when the first time you see it, it's scary, but also
But then you
disgusting.
go
Yeah, right.
right. It's like
They just need sound names for your reactions. Ooh, that's dread.
Onomatopoeia.
Yeah,
I
it's
think,
the ooh.
but I think like in the Shining or something, when the blood flood happens, if I were to scare pass, that might be a scare, but it's also a gross out too.
Yeah.
It's kind of
So
gross.
so and you'll see in this exercise that I did where I broke it down, I kind of put them as 1-2 punches together appropriately. But doing this now, we have done horror comedies on the show, but I don't think we've ever really broken down like from a tool standpoint. And it was like fun to kind of watch this movie and try to figure out like, oh, it's using those horror hierarchy, but it's also adding laughs like simultaneously with that. And I think that was really instructive. Is basically like sometimes levity is releasing the tension from all of those scare tactics, and then other times the laugh is like part of the scare. Like it's like a funny dread, a funny scare, a funny gross out, you know? So I think this exercise is going to show this breakdown is going to show how this movie does it. So Bob, I broke down because I love hearing Bob read these things. This is just my reason to just hear Bob read this. So I broke down. We're going to do this out of order because I broke down another scene that comes before this, but whatever, it's appropriate. So Jamie, I used your terminology. So dread, scare, gross out.
Okay.
And I broke down Ash versus his hand round 2 and kind of showed how it's playing. The idea here is that when you're writing a script and you got a horror scene, you want to give us the fireworks, right? You want to be, it needs to be a variety. It can't just be all dread. It can't just be all jump scares. It can't just be all gross outs. And if you play with it and you mix and match, you can take one scene and have like, you know, a whole variety of emotional responses that are all different types of scares. So that's the idea.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
And this scene is Evil Dead 2, Ash versus Hand round 2, the second the second fight.
It's when we cut they're in the woods. The Annie and her group are in the woods and they're on the way.
Yeah.
And it cuts back to Ash, and that's where it starts.
Okay. So the funny dread, Ash traps his possessed severed hand under a can and puts books on top. And you didn't write this down, but the book says "A Farewell to Arms," which makes it even funnier, right?
Yeah, it's even funnier.
Funny dread, Ash redresses his wrist stump bandage. The can moves in the background. Dread, Ash loses sight of his trapped hand. He grabs his gun, searches for it. Funny scare and gross out. The severed hand squeals and scurries around the floor as Ash tries to shoot it. It crawls in the wall before Ash can get it. I just realized too, how does the hand make sound? It doesn't matter. Funny funny scare and gross out. Ash reloads. The severed hand pops out and taps its finger, impatiently waiting. Funny scare and gross out. The severed hand hits a mousetrap, gets caught, escapes, sends Ash a bloody middle finger, and squeals "motherfucker." Scare and gross out. Ash fires more rounds into the wall. Hears a death squeal. Blood drips out of the bullet hole in the wall. Funny scare and gross out. A volcano of blood and black I said glue. I was going to say glue. Black goo erupts from the wall and soaks Ash. It recedes back into the wall, taking the blood and goo stains with it. Funny scare and gross out. The deer head on the wall comes to life and laughs maniacally at Ash. Funny scare. Everything in the room comes to life and laughs maniacally at Ash. Ash laughs with them. Funny scare. Ash shoots at a sound in the wall, assuming he shot the hand again. Dread. Ash reloads, waiting for another demon attack. Scare. Ash is tackled by Annie's trail guide and boyfriend. They've arrived.
So like look at all of the different uses of it, you know? Like
Right.
it's playing with those tools, but it's doing different things. It's not just the same thing over and over again. So
It's what this reminds me of. Like I had another thing, and this just basically what you're saying reminds me of it. I've been working on a script with a writer and a consultant in a script coaching way, and they're new to horror, and they'll get to a point where they'll be like, the gag will get to one spot, like it'll be like the hand's possessed, they cut it off or something like that, and I'm like, my note to them is always like, okay, you have a thing, take that gag to the next level, then go beyond that, and then go beyond that, and just keep amping it up. And
I feel like this is where whiteboarding would come in, right?
in some ways, but they send me the script and it just ends. It's like 2 sentences, and I send them back my version. I say, try this, and mine's like half a page, or it's 2 pages, so I'm taking their like one little sentence and amplifying it. I'm like, this is what you have to do in horror comedy. So like an example would be the possessed hand scene. So in some movies, it'd be enough to just have the hand turn gangrene or something and be like, I'm becoming possessed, and it's going up. But in this one, it starts fighting him. In this one, not only does it start fighting him, it starts punching him in the face. It starts smashing plates over his head, so they took it to the next level. Then it knocks him out. And what does it do? It starts inching toward the knife and inching like a monster. So it keeps going, right? And then what does it do? So it's inching toward the meat cleaver. Then he stabs it, and he's got these crazy eyes, like, I won, but he's stabbing himself basically, and he's killing himself. So it takes it to another level. Then the chainsaw comes out, so it takes it to an even another level, and it keeps upping the ante like one after another. And I think in comedy horror, especially in horror, you have to do this to an extent. I think there's a level of this you have to do in horror, but I think in comedy horror, you really have to keep pushing the gag just out there. It's kind of like a bit in stand-up comedy where you might come up with one joke, but how do you turn that, into
it does feel like a skit kind of when you look at it that way.
How do you turn a joke into a bit? And that's kind of what you have to do in horror comedy, is you have to turn a scare into a bit in some ways. It has to be a series of scares and jokes that keep going back and forth.
Completely unrelated to us doing this episode. 2 days ago, I watched, just for the Halloween season, I watched Idle Hands, and I was thinking the whole time, like, there had to be somebody who wrote this movie that was like, all the things that Evil Dead 2 or didn't have the time to do.
Yeah.
Let's put it in another movie.
That's great.
Because it's kind of, everything Jamie's saying. Like, they had a list. They're just like, well, let's just make another movie with more hand stuff.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, Jamie, you kind of did it already, but I feel like we can still do it. So I wanted to take the same idea through a different lens of our good news, bad news technique that we do a lot.
Yeah.
So do you want to explain good news, bad news, Jamie, and then I'll jump in?
Yeah. So good news, bad news is a tool that's been around forever. Who knows where it started? I've seen it in a million different books and things like that. And it's basically the idea that a action sequence of any kind, whether it's a horror action sequence or Raiders of the Lost Ark or the Solo episode, I think was one we did a really good. If you want to check this out,
we've done many.
Solo, Willow, Raiders.
Yeah, maybe Die Hard too. I don't know.
Yeah,
you might have done it. So good news, bad news is just that instead of just having someone, and again, this is what I see in amateur scripts. John Wick picks up the gun, shoots somebody, bang bang, the end. Right.
That's it.
And I mean, it sounds like you're probably sitting there listening to this, being like, that doesn't happen. Nobody would write that. Most people write that. That's how most people write.
Yeah.
But screenwriters that really know their craft know that you have to add in the good news. He grabs the gun. The bad news, it's out of bullets, or something like that. The good news is he throws his gun. The bad news is the villain catches it and he has the bullets or something. I don't know. I'm making some dumb story up.
No.
But so that's good
the gun
news.
Comes
bad
to
news.
life.
Yeah, the gun comes to life.
So the idea here is it's another brainstorming technique. You're looking at a blank page, and I personally think this works for dialogue as well. Just like two people sitting at a table, how can you make it? And if you don't have Pope in the pool, which is another thing, how can you make it riveting? You can make the dialogue interactions good news, bad news as well. But the point is, it's a great technique if you're staring at the blank page and you know how the scene starts and you know how the scene's going to end, but you want to make it compelling. Try using this technique, just writing a bunch of blank good news, bad news. Now, something interesting that has happened through the course of the show is one of my friends who's a listener, John Squires, he is the editor of Bloody Disgusting, so he knows a little bit about horror. And the first time he heard good news, bad news, he was like, dude, like with horror, good news, bad news is the opposite. It's usually bad news, worse news, worse news. And we have done this a couple times and found, in fact, that tracks. So I broke down the first scene that Jamie kind of just went through already. And I thought that we could look at it through that lens. So Bob, did you have that? Yeah.
So okay, yeah, and this is Ash versus Hand round 1, right? We should have done this first. Oh, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, the bad news is Ash's hand is still possessed and stronger than ever. It continues attacking him with ferocity. The good news is Ash rinses his hand in the sink, temporarily drowning it and slowing it down. Bad news is Ash's hand pulls itself out of the water, grabs a plate, and breaks it over Ash's head. Worst news is Ash's hand smashes more plates on his head and smacks Ash's face into the sink, breaking his tooth. Worst news is Ash's hand launches Ash into the cabinets until he falls on the floor. Worst news is Ash's hand grabs more plates off the floor and breaks them on Ash's head. Worst news is Ash's hand finds a brick on the floor and knocks Ash unconscious. Worst news is Ash's hand spots a cleaver on the floor. It drags Ash's unconscious body toward the cleaver. Good news is just as Ash's hand is about to grab the knife, Ash awakens and stabs his own hand with a knife, stopping it from grabbing the cleaver. Simultaneous good news and worse news. Ash revs the chainsaw and saws off his own possessed hand. Who's laughing now?
Yeah, so see how there's no good news until the end of that scene?
It just keeps getting worse.
As Jamie's used the word relentless, it's just like relentlessly bad stuff happening to Ash for the entirety of the scene. Sorry for that typo there, Bob.
No, it's fine. And I would say that entire scene is a perfect example of the innocent must suffer and a hero must face blood. Like literally that scene is doing everything of history, right? Because Ash isn't guilty. He's being punished. He's the innocent must suffer, and he's tasting blood to be a man. He's cutting his own hand off.
Yeah, I love that that cutting his own hand off is also good news, but it's also the worst news.
It's good news because there's a solution.
Yeah.
Because I guess it could possess the rest of his body or something.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah, and so
we're not talking about mumbo jumbo, but there's a lot of discussion on that.
Yeah,
they even use that phrase. Maybe that's where Blake got it.
It could be.
These pages are a bunch of mumbo jumbo.
How do the Deadites work? It doesn't matter.
The two other techniques for horror comedy that I personally are my favorites when I write horror comedy are. There was one thing though. Let me just to go back super quick because I forgot there was one more thing I wanted to mention about the good news, bad news. I've many times been hired to rewrite things. And 80% of what I did was go in and do good news, bad news, because the script was just flat and it was supposed to be a comedy or an action movie. And they just didn't have any good news, bad news. It was just, pick up gun, shoot dead, or, whatever. It was that. That was it. That was your whole sequence. So it really is a thing to do. I mean, I think the writer out there can make all your scripts better by just looking at your kind of scare sequences, your action sequences, and saying, how can I do this good news, bad news trick? And I think you'll be better off. Anyway,
I was going to say, check out our episode on The Killer, because I did good news, bad news on that. And I thought that's a movie where no one would expect
Mm-hmm.
Good News, Bad News at
Yeah.
all. And then we found that one sequence was like chock
Oh
full of
yeah,
it.
it was so full of
But
it.
that's a movie where Jamie, I feel like a normal person would be like, why doesn't he just walk in and shoot the guy and it's over?
Right.
You know,
Right.
it seems like obvious, but it's not.
So yeah. And then I know I'm jumping around, but the two other horror techniques that I wanted to mention that I use all the time. One is use real horror as kind of the straight man for your story. The more tense your movie can be, the funnier your jokes will be.
Mm.
It's like you might think, how can I make my movie funnier? Sometimes it's make it scarier because it's going to rub so hard. Like people are going to need the tension release so much that if the scarier you can make it, the better the tension will be amped up for the release when you do something really funny. So, a moment like Ash saying groovy will suddenly be this huge release where the whole audience can kind of laugh together. And this is something I know Jimmy and Bob have had experience with. For horror, especially horror comedy, I like to picture a festival audience. Like, how are they going to react? And I think that's the type of thing that you'll be like, is this joke going to kill in my festival horror audience? Because and sometimes you can kind of modulate based on that in some ways. So anyway, the scarier it is, the funnier it's going to be. So if you can somehow add the scary, don't forget the scary in your horror comedy. You don't have to make everything safe. You don't have to make everything like not scary. Horror comedies are actually for people that do like to be scared and do like scary things. So don't forget the horror in your horror comedy. And the last one that I just wanted to mention that I think this one does a great job with, that I do all the time, is torturing your main character can be very, very funny. So if you put your main character through the ringer, depending on who that main character is, in some movies, in some horror comedies, that could be one of the funniest things you do, because it's also kind of character driven. The more we torture them, the more we see their comedic quirks come out. So torture your main characters.
I mean, this is the movie people would say first when you would say that idea.
The director tortured his actor to get the performance.
It's like this is the example of that. This whole franchise.
Yep.
Yeah. Real quick, I know we kind of said it before we recorded, but did you guys want to? We were saying we're going to talk about horror comedies. Did we want to just like make a small Jamie list of any horror comedies that we love? I mean, before we get to the last point here. I don't know.
Dead Alive right off the top.
Dead Alive. I was going to say The Frighteners. I've always stood by.
Well, Peter Jackson right off the top.
I was going to say
we should probably do in the future too, right?
I know.
I was going to say I'm a big fan, but much like I'm a fan of Evil Dead 1, I'm a big fan of Bad Taste for that reason. Just because,
Bad Taste is great.
Man, all three.
Yeah, it amazes me how good
our polls are all Peter Jackson.
It amazes me what he did with pennies on that movie, Bad Taste. Like he's got like a RPG, and he's fighting himself and all this crazy stuff.
The aughts were so nuts because we just said 3 Peter Jackson movies, but like the aughts were when all of us that were nerds for Raimi and Jackson because of these horror movies, they were making Lord of the Rings and Spider-Man. It was like,
right?
It was like our dudes were in charge of Hollywood,
Yeah, Shaun of the Dead. You have to
Shaun of the Dead, obviously.
Shaun
yeah,
of the Dead.
Classic.
Yeah. Lost Boys is one of my big ones. We're gonna do it on the show someday. Fright Night. Yep.
Monster Squad. We've done Monster Squad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Gremlins in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. We argued that it was one of the big first ones. Like sort of it was. There weren't many that came before it. It sort of like created that experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like I think that's like good Mount Rushmore.
That's a Mount Rushmore right there.
Death Becomes Her.
Oh,
I'm thinking like that kind of thing.
Incredible.
Right.
God, Zemeckis.
Really, like you could say that what we're talking about was like almost commodified in Tales from the Crypt. Like that whole show is pretty much.
Well, I was going to say, you saw Creep Show. Creep Show would be one as well. That kind of was that.
Mm-hmm.
Good stuff. I just wanted to list movies.
Yeah. No, let's just list movies. I mean, for anyone out there, if you haven't seen Demon Knight, I'm a huge fan of the Tales from the Crypt movie, and it's a great horror comedy.
I enjoy Bordello of Blood. It's not good. I'm not standing by it, but it's a fun watch. Okay.
Billy Zane is one of the most entertaining villains for me in that movie.
Yeah, that's a great movie. I mean, I wouldn't mind doing that either.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a great movie. That's what
it's
I'm saying
great
though.
all
Tales from
around.
the Crypt is like, if you want to understand horror comedy, watch that entire show.
Yes.
It understands it better than
God, the
most.
Arnold episode
Right.
is so good.
So good. Right.
We got to list. We all got to just list. This is great.
Just list stuff. That's all we need. That's what Jamie's podcast. Remember the Jamie podcast where he just lists box office numbers.
Just going to be lists. We're just going to go through the list.
And that's why you get really famous off that, Jamie. That's what you would.
Yeah,
that'd be your breakout.
I'm just going to start, like, I'm going to do all time, and I'm just going to start at number 1 and go all the way down to like number 50,000. And then
until
movie?
You have to stop when you hit one of your movies.
Oh, well, then I probably will never stop. I can't imagine. like my movies are probably theatrical releases of like $800 or something.
Right.
Like
you got to go from like Avatar to you.
Yeah. It was. Yeah. I had one movie that was popular in like Brazil or something. It was in a weird, it's some random place. It was, I can't remember. I know Night Watchman was popular somewhere, and then Altered.
Night Watchman, horror comedy.
Yeah, there you go. And then
let's go kill some dead people.
And then Altered was in like some other like random country. It made like it was number 1 at the box office in some random country that you would never expect. And it probably made $10,000, but still it would be a long time before I got to that on my list.
Well, there you go. There's your podcast.
There you go.
Okay, let's talk about
the backdoor pilot into Jamie's
that was the pitch for Jamie's podcast.
It's like the Ropers of this podcast. or Frasier, I guess, is a more modern version of that.
Yeah, the Frasier of this podcast.
Or Young Sheldon.
For the longest time, I didn't even know that was. I didn't know that show was based on Sheldon from the other show. I have not watched either show.
Apparently, they're making a new spinoff about the comic book store in that show.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to our last point before everyone's going to complain about that. Let's talk. Lastly, let's talk about the midpoint. You wanted to talk about the midpoint.
Yeah. So, like the Big Bang cinematic universe, the midpoints are I don't know how to tie in the Big Bang Theory. So the interesting thing watching this, the midpoint I would peg as when the new people finally find Ash. Like that's like it's like dead in the middle of the movie. And it does the very traditional thing of merging the A story and the B story. They collide, right? So that's one thing it does. In this book that one day everyone here will buy and want autographed copies of, I came up with some things I commonly see as midpoints in most horror movies, like in many horror movies, to help writers out when they're brainstorming their own. So I thought I'd take this. The reason I thought this would be a good movie to do it is I think this one crosses about 2 or 3 of them. So it's not just one, it uses 2 or 3. So a midpoint typically raises the stakes. It usually crosses A story and B story. But here are some common ones I see in horror movies. One, a stranger appears. Some new person arrives at the cabin or something like that. Okay. This one does that. That's my number 1 on my list. Number 2, out of the frying pan into the fryer. So him being thrown into the basement after being knocked out. It's kind of all part of that sequence. It's kind of out of the frying pan into the fryer moment. Number 3, a big plot twist. This one debatable, but you could say the revelation of the possessed Henrietta or whatever in the basement is kind of a plot twist of sorts. Number 4, a new way to survive. This is a common thing I see in the horror movie. Like they figure out there's a different way to survive. I don't just have to fight them off. I don't just have to escape. Maybe there's something else. And I think the reveal of the missing pages here kind of mixes that in. Mm-hmm. Number 5, not so much with this, but maybe a little, a wind that stirs the monster. Like something happens, but that kind of stirs the monster. Number 6, oftentimes the ticking clock is kicked in. I don't think anything changes with the ticking clock in this one, but
The ticking clock is just they will be killed at any moment.
It's reminded.
Yeah. And 7 is a revelation of the monster. So sometimes it's like the hidden thing fully reveals itself. And again, I think in the basement we see the hidden thing kind of fully reveal itself.
Yeah.
So you could also sort of count the trees coming to life.
Yeah.
Right. As the full measure of the monster.
And
yeah.
It could be and again, it's kind of like it stirs an escalation in the forces surrounding them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jamie, you made me, when you pointed the midpoint out, I watched it kind of like for that.
Okay.
And one thing it does that I love, to number 7's point, to the sum 7 is, we actually get a very traditional Hollywood cheeseburger villain's plan. Exclamation. They say, we are the things that were and shall be again, spirits of the book. We want what is yours, your life. Dead by dawn, so they say right there, this is our plan. Here's who we are, here's what we want. You're going to be dead by dawn. So you do get that deadline reminder,
ticking clock reminder, which is often what the ticking clock at the midpoint is often just a reminder, or kind of like a check the watch. Oh, an hour to dawn or something like that.
Yeah.
A lot of times that is what the midpoint is. It's not.
It was very traditional in that way.
The other thing related to this that I have in my book is something called, I say happens in the back end of most horror movies. And I call it the phenomenon of the incredibly shrinking house. I think the story gets to smaller and smaller locations around the midpoint. Not always, but it's a common thing that happens. You just keep going smaller, smaller, smaller in your location. And in this case, going to the basement is kind of getting more claustrophobic, more contained and stuff like that, at least in that moment. So it points that out as well.
That's great.
So they're the things that anyway, they're the midpoint things I wanted to mention.
That's good. And that brings us to the end of our topics. Did you guys have anything else you want to say besides listing more movies?
And TV show spinoffs.
Yeah.
Favorite Bruce Campbell non-Evil Dead things? Briscoe County Jr. But speaking of Billy Zane, he was supposed to be the Phantom. That was in his book Shins Like a Kill. He and Billy Zane were up for the Phantom, and he thought he was going to get that role. Like, I think it was a crushing blow that he did not get the role of the Phantom.
That would have been.
But he was in Congo.
Congo?
Yeah.
For 5 seconds, and he doesn't like Congos.
He's in the new television series that has a Eduardo Sanchez directed episode in episode 6.
Hell yeah.
Hysteria.
The worlds are colliding.
Yes. So Ed
and let's not forget Burn Notice. I know Bruce Campbell is proud of Burn Notice.
Yes,
so.
he definitely.
I've never watched Burn Notice. So
I never have either.
Nor have I.
Not like turn my nose up to it or anything like that. Just haven't watched it.
Yeah,
I know. I can say that I didn't entirely fall in love with The Man with Two Brains, or what was it?
Yeah, I don't.
Was that it? One that he directed?
Isn't that a Steve Martin movie too?
Yeah, I'm saying it wrong. It's the one that he directed.
I know the one you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I wish I liked it more, but I'm happy it exists.
He's somebody that used to come to the horror conventions in Maryland every year. He doesn't really anymore. He kind of stopped probably around the time Marvel kicked in or something. But he would always, he had a good shtick. He's a guy, he would do like an MC thing. He'd kind of do a little comedy. But I remember I met him, because I paid to meet him. It wasn't like we hung out together or anything. Back then it didn't cost much.
Important context.
I think,
yeah, right.
I think all you had to do was buy his book to get his autograph back then. Like now it's like $100 or to get a selfie or something.
Right.
It was like, back then our phones weren't even very good to give you a selfie. I think we had to use digital cameras or something. So maybe the word selfie hadn't been invented. So I paid my $25 to buy his book, which I already had, but I bought the paperback so he could sign it. And I went up to him and I said, "Hey, I'm a big fan of yours." And this is around the time, it was probably before I sold anything, but probably after I had started screenwriting and like did well in a contest or something like that. I said, "I'm a screenwriter." And he's like, "Yeah, man, it's fun, isn't it? It's fun." that was my full conversation with
Bruce Campbell.
Bruce Campbell. I don't know if I thought I was going to like attach him to my script or something. I probably had some thought in my head like, I'll tell him I'm a screenwriter and give him my business card or something. He's like, it's fun. It's a good way to pass the time, pal. Okay, you want a picture? That was kind of that was my brand moment with Bruce Campbell.
You're like the 50th screenwriter who's come up with him.
The line. I waited in line for 2 hours, so that was, and then you still had 2 more hours to go. So
that day, yeah.
The movie I was thinking of was The Man with the Screaming Brain.
That's it.
Okay.
Sorry, I just had to correct myself.
Now that movie is amazing. Like I thought you were talking about The Man with Two Brains. No.
The Man with Two Brains kind of rules.
It's been a long time.
That's kind of a horror comedy too, right? Man with Two Brains.
Those weird after the jerk Steve Martin movies are all very interesting. They're all very interesting movies. All of them.
Well, I think that's everything. Unless you guys have anything to plug.
Yeah, I'll do my plug again. I'll do my epic plug since this is our October podcast. A movie I co-wrote and co-produced, and Jamie also helped with the story, and Bob also worked on it as well. So all 3 of us worked on this movie. WNUF Halloween Special is on Shudder now in 7 countries. Every English-speaking country that there is a Shudder in, it's there. So if you're listening to us internationally, you can also probably see it. So, and then the other thing is Fright Rags, the horror merchandiser, they just put out a merch line for WNF Halloween Special, which is insane to me. And so check that out. One of the items already sold out. There's 3 other t-shirts up there. So look up Fright Rags WNF Halloween Special. And yeah.
Cool. It. Jamie, you got anything?
I don't have anything to plug, so I'll do one of my usual plug the podcast plugs. So if you're out there, if you made it this far, and there's only a few of you that have made it this far, the secret code is fake Shemp. Plug sneak fake Shemp into a message about us, and we will know what you're talking about. And review the podcast, do all that stuff too. But fake Shemp, okay? Fake Shemp is the secret word. Just hit us up with fake Shemp. You will get.
It's how we know you listened.
We'll ship you a gift from Fright Rags. We won't. I'm just kidding. We will not.
Yeah, wish I could. That would be awesome.
That'd be neat, but no, that's not happening. No
offense. No. The plug is really if you listen this far, it means you enjoyed it. Please, even if you've already said something, go retweet, press like, do something if you can. It's really appreciated. We don't have any other way of getting the word out there. We think we have a lot of valuable content for people, and go share it. We'd love it if you went and shared it. It would mean a lot to us. So if you made it this far, go do that.
Perfect. I think that's everything, guys.
Well said.
Till next time.
Thank you for listening, everyone.
Happy Halloween, I think.
Yeah.
Happy Halloween.
Okay.
Hey, this is Bob Rose, and thank you for listening to Writers Blockbusters. If you'd like to financially support the show, please consider joining my Patreon. I've been producing the podcast for several years completely out of pocket, and I'd like to keep producing it ad-free and no longer at a loss. If you'd like to help, head on over to patreon.com/Bob Rose Sucks. That's right, Bob Rose Sucks. And if you want the one and only Jimmy George to help polish up that writing project you're kind of struggling with, head on over to scriptbutcher.com. As a listener, you already know he's the best there is, scriptbutcher.com. You can also support the show by simply sharing it or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate both. Thank you for listening, and see you next episode.